Hello, Canucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Canucks Conversation, brought to you by Bet365. My name is David Gutrelli. I am going to be joined in a moment by Harmon Dial. Our technical producer is Jacob Lazar. There he is. Harmon's here as well. So the Canucks close out deadline day, Harm, with two moves. They send Lucas Reichel to Boston for a sixth and David Kemp to the Capitals for a sixth-round pick as well. Notably, they do not move out Teddy Bluger or Evander Kane, and that is the main focus of our chat early on today.
Yeah, and you called it. You had your original prediction that was, hey, I don't think they're going to be able to move at least one of the pending UFAs. And then later in the week, you doubled down and said they're only going to be able to move one of the pending UFAs. And that's what ended up happening. I think the surprise in all this is that Kampf was the one that they ended up moving instead of Bluger, where Bluger's a better player than Kampf. Sure, I can imagine there's a world in which the Canucks have more interest in retaining Bluger beyond this season. Kane isn't a huge shock, but to me, the fact that they didn't monetize Bluger ahead of the deadline is disappointing. I understand that, sure, they're now presumably going to look to extend him at a decent number, and he can be a fine stopgap. But there are a number of fine stopgaps that you could have found for a bottom six center in free agency, and to me, even if it was a fourth or a fifth round pick, I think the Canucks should have pulled the trigger on that kind of a deal. I will say on this final day, when it came to bottom six centers, the fact that Scott Lawton only went for a third round pick does surprise me a little bit. I would have expected Lawton to go for a second, especially given that McCarron went for a second. We saw Nick Waugh go for a first, Jason Dickinson go for first, and in Waugh and Dickinson's case, those guys went for first round picks, which is a little bit different. But Scott Lawton only commanding a third round pick when he's a right shot center, when he plays with grit and edge. Lawton is a more valuable piece than Bluger is. And so the fact that Lawton only went for a third makes me think that, okay, the Canucks probably weren't going to be able to get a third for Bluger on this final day, but I would have taken anything over nothing.
Yeah, and which is what we've been saying all week, right? Is that you got to get something. They do get something for David Kemp. Let's pull out the board. We're going to get to what Patrick Allvin said about not being able to trade Kane and Bluger, but we'll pull out the board because before, and I know we have a lot of new people today, before the deadline, I asked you, Harm, what constitutes a disastrous trade deadline? Like, what are bad things that the Canucks could do at this deadline? We wrote down can't trade Kane, they extend Bluger, they can't move UFAs, and they don't move out a forward with term. We were able to cross off last night on the emergency show with the Connor Garland trade. We were able to cross that off, and because they were able to move a forward with term, one of these vets with term, and they also moved Tyler Myers, of course. We'll talk about that as well. But as we look at it, they couldn't trade Kane. They haven't extended Bluger yet, but they also didn't trade him. And yeah, they only trade one UFA. So my question to you, Harm, and we'll get to Patrick Allvin in a second here, but my question to you is when you look at the Canucks deadline work as a whole, and just to brief everybody on it, when we look at the Canucks deadline, it is Tyler Myers to Dallas for a second and a fourth, Jet Wu to San Jose for Jack Thompson, Connor Garland to Columbus for a second and a third, Curtis Douglas claimed off waivers. I threw that in there as well. And then the Kampf and Reichel trades for 2 6th-round picks. Really, the Canucks net 2 seconds, a third, a fourth, and 2 sixths to close out this deadline. How do you grade their deadline, Harm?
Yeah, I'm also going to include the Kiefer Sherwood trade as part of that because that was a proactive decision, but they could have easily held on to him last minute and made that trade this week. Overall, it's fine. It's decent work. If I had to give it a grade, I'd give it a B- maybe, where I like that in the Sherwood, Myers, and Garland trades, they targeted draft capital. They didn't go chasing prospects or reclamation projects. And especially when I look at Bobby McMahon, a comparable player to Sherwood, going for a second and a fourth round pick to the Seattle Kraken, and that being a little bit of an underwhelming return, I think that vindicates the timing for the Canucks. as far as moving ahead of the market, pulling the trigger early. And I was always going to look toward what happened with Bobby McMahon, because I think McMahon's a similar type of player. He's a bigger player, but although he's not as physical, we're talking a third liner that has been scoring roughly at a 25 goal pace, cheap cap hit. I think broadly speaking, McMahon is slightly less valuable than Sherwood overall. But if McMahon went for, let's say, a first round pick plus something else, we would have been looking at, all right, the Kiefer Sherwood return in hindsight was fine, but if they had held out, maybe they could have gotten a little bit more. The fact that McMahon only went for a second and a fourth, I think that's a stamp of approval for the Canucks in terms of being self-aware enough to understand that when the Sharks came in with 2 first-round picks, which presumably are going to be in the middle of those rounds as well, not late seconds, that they cashed in on that rather than being stubborn with a really high asking price and waiting too late. And maybe at that point, more players enter the market and you don't end up getting what you wanted. The Myers trade, again, working around the no movement clause, getting market value, basically getting the exact same haul that the Penguins got last year for Luke Shen with the second and a fourth round pick, I think is tidy work, and especially enticing him for that destination. That's an elective rebuilding move, right? That's not a trade they had to make. And then Garland as well, the return, yeah, it's not anything to necessarily write home about, and he would have had slightly more value if he was a pure rental as opposed to having the 6x6 extension kicking in next season. But at least the move to get off of the contract and understand that, all right, you made a mistake in the summer, you at least got to move on from him and recoup some value and clear your bucks for the future, knowing that he's going to turn 30 years old soon and this rebuild is going to take a long time. That's a stamp of approval. Obviously, the work with the UFAs is underwhelming, right? To get nothing for Evander Kane is disappointing. I think more than how could they not get anything for Evander Kane, it takes you back more to the offseason decision to spend some of that precious cap space on acquiring him from Edmonton and just
for a fourth, giving up a fourth round pick too.
Just the overall Kane experiment and the overall Kane bet has, of course, been a train wreck. It's been catastrophic. And now there are questions to be asked as well about if he's with this team beyond the deadline, which we're expecting, what are they going to do as far as, I don't want to see him taking minutes away from younger players. I don't want to see him in the top 6. I don't want to see him potentially with Elias Pettersson. I would have dealt him for future considerations. The fact that you can even just offload the contract and open up a contract slot is disappointing. And then, of course, with Bluger, sure, the return may not have been, or the demand may not have been what you wanted, but at some point during this deadline week, I would have preferred to see them move him for something rather than nothing. So when I step back and look at it, I will give them credit for some of the proactive stuff they did with the vets that have turned beyond this season. Of course, the work with the UFAs is underwhelming, so that leaves me in that B- range where I'm not going to freak out about, oh, what a disastrous trade deadline because they couldn't trade Teddy Bluger for a 4th or 5th round pick, right? It's not the end of the world, but it's also not a home run. And when we even look at the returns for Garland and Myers and Sherwood, they're in line with market value. They're good. They're decent returns, but they're not stellar. It's not, whoa, look at how badly this team overpaid to acquire one of Vancouver's players.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm kind of in that same boat. C+ to B- is kind of what we're seeing a lot of in the chat. I have to agree. I want to hear what Patrick Allvin had to say. This was Patrick Allvin speaking after the deadline. He met with reporters, and of course, he was asked about not being able to move Bluger and not being able to move Kane. Here's Patrick Allvin's answer to those questions.
Again, look at the market today. It was very unpredictable. I didn't get any offers, so I was a little bit surprised. There been those 2 guys have been playing really well for us, and Teddy has been here for a couple of years now and is a good player on the ice and a good player off the ice for us as well. And Evander Kane is a veteran player in the league. So we all know that the roster spots and and cap space flexibility plays in. So yeah.
I don't want to get too caught up in the semantics. Like, there's already people pointing out, like, well, can't he make an offer to offer them out? We're not getting caught up in the semantics. The point is, there wasn't much interest in Bluger, and there wasn't much interest in Kane. I want to focus on Kane.
So, important to say, if Camp was able to get you something, then Bluger would have been able to get you something as well. Maybe not today specifically at the price you wanted.
Yeah.
And maybe teams weren't calling you first to do it, but to think at some point this week you couldn't have gotten some draft pick for him. I just wouldn't agree with that sentiment. Again, we literally saw a slightly worse player, David Kampf, net you a draft pick.
Absolutely fair. You know what? Absolutely fair. And I'm not sitting here trying to defend Patrick Allvin, but the part I really want to focus on is, if you're Evander Kane hearing that, like, what are you thinking? Because for a guy whose whole kind of game is built on, oh, I'm a playoff performer, I can help you in the playoffs, I can help you in the playoffs, everyone looked at him and said, yeah, no, thanks, but no thanks. And he's going to be 35 in August. And again, I kind of flippantly made the prediction, as I do most predictions that I make, said like the Canucks might be his last will be his last NHL team. They will be for the rest of this season. We know that now. He's going to be a free agent. Like, what does free agency look like for Evander Kane? Are we talking PTO level? You would hope not, for Evander Kane's sake, but he certainly hasn't done anything to get multiple years. At best, he's getting a 1-year deal in free agency.
Yeah, and even if it is a 1-year guaranteed contract, it's going to be cheap money, right? He's not gonna get more than the $1 million range if he gets that guaranteed contract at all. There is a possibility that if he keeps underperforming down the stretch, that he's sitting around in late August and perhaps has to look at a PTO,
which is crazy. Again,
and honestly, I'm just surprised that in the lead up toward the deadline, the last couple weeks, that he wasn't able to make more of a noticeable impact, even just physically, right? Again, I pointed this out before. Around mid-January, there were a couple games right after Kiefer Sherwood was traded where he looked more engaged, where he was moving his feet better, hunting down loose pucks, a little bit more physical. Remember when you blew up Matthew Schaefer in that game against the Islanders, and you're thinking, all right, he's ramping up, understanding that, hey, it's showcase time. If I want to get traded to a contender, I'm going to have to play better hockey than I've played for the first 35, 40 games of the season or whatever it was at that point. And then it completely fizzled out. He went back to being mostly a non-factor. And for the season as a whole, we know that he was always going to have some warts in terms of his defensive play and the offense being inconsistent. But I think the biggest surprise is that in the lead up, at least to the deadline, he wasn't showing more of a physical side to him, right? That's a huge part of what contenders are looking for. It's that heaviness. It's that grit. It's that physicality, the game within the game. And honestly, when you look at Kane's time as a Canuck so far, I can only think of a couple big hits he's made, or a few moments where he's really mixed it up in scrums or stood up for teammates. Like, if it was your scoring declining, that feels like something that, all right, as you become older, you don't have as much control over. But the physical side of it and how engaged you are from that perspective, I think as a player, you have more control over. And I think that's been one of the most underwhelming parts, as well as he hasn't brought that toughness. He hasn't brought that edge. And so if you were a contending team watching Evander Kane tape ahead of the deadline, if you had scouts in the building watching him, just the lack of bite in his game would have been disappointing, and it would have probably thrown you off of wanting the player as well.
Okay, there's some people in the chat. I want to read a couple comments here. This one is from Dylan McDonald. He said, the problem from here on out with the rest of our rebuild is if we are keeping Hronek and can't trade Petey, we have nothing left that will net us more first-round picks. Dan in the chat said, we've traded away almost all the players who could return a first. Hronek is the only guy I can think of, and apparently he's not getting traded. DeBrusk seems like the one that you might hold out hope for, and that one seems like an off-season trade, right? And it seems like one that they might make this off-season. Brock Besser's probably not returning you a first at this time, but we've talked about the potential of rehabbing his value. What were you saying?
I think there's no chance that DeBrusk nets you a first.
Oh, yeah, fair enough.
I think at best you're looking at a Connor Garland type return, if that. Like, wouldn't you be surprised if DeBrusk got you a first round pick as a winger?
Yeah.
Right. Keep in mind,
DeBrusk,
we've seen mediocre, we've seen middle of the lineup players that aren't particularly spectacular, like Waugh and Dickinson, go in trades that have netted their teams a first round pick. But those are centers, right? And it's the same thing with the defenseman. When a guy like Justin Falk gets you a first round pick, it's because he's a top 4 right shot defenseman. As a winger that scored what 2 or 3 5-on-5 goals this year, like I don't think the contract is that bad. 5.5 in a rising cap world is totally fine. There's not a lot. There's not a ton of term left on it. I'm not worried about teams being scared by the contract. But why would a team give you a first round pick for Jake DeBrusk?
I guess I'm looking at it and saying, okay, Connor Garland hasn't played a lot of playoff games. Connor Garland hasn't scored like DeBrusk has. DeBrusk's got over 25 goals in like 3 or 4 seasons in his career already. He's, the 28 goal season in his first year in Vancouver. Like those numbers put him in a different category than Connor Garland in my view. And I get what you're saying though, that like why would a team do you a favor? My broader point is that there's still going to be assets, even if it is just a second and a third.
Sure.
There's still going to be assets coming, but when it comes to a first round pick, yeah, you probably are just talking about Filip Hronek. And again, this is why you want to see them get creative, because even if they use all this draft capital that they have, right? We aren't sure, right? Like we aren't sure if this is going to be enough to pull off that rebuild and to get the army that you need to be a competitive team and actually compete for a Stanley Cup. Now, obviously some things have to go right for you along the way, and it's impossible no matter how much preparation you do and how much selling you can do, but you want to increase your volume, you want to maximize your chances. And it's just, if this is it, I don't know if they've necessarily done that.
Yeah, and this is where it's interesting to look at your competition, right? We talk so much about how Anaheim and San Jose are coming and how bright those teams' respective futures are. But I even look at a team like the Calgary Flames, where sure, they haven't found their star forward yet, but that's also true for the Canucks. They've started to accumulate a decent amount of prospects. And when I look at how many first round picks they have coming, they're like, if you think the Canucks have a lot of draft capital because of all the second round picks they've traded for, look at what the Calgary Flames possess. Not only have they made 4 first round picks over the last 2 years, but they've got 6 more first round picks coming over the next 3 drafts. 2 of them in each of 2026, 2027, and 2028. They've got 8 second round picks on top of that over the next 3 drafts, 4 of them this year, right? So when we talk about having as many lottery tickets as possible, the Flames between 2024 and 2028 are going to select 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times in that span. With the Canucks, we're only talking about the 1 extra first round pick from the Quinn Hughes trade. And sure, applaud them for sure for accumulating a bunch of seconds. That's great work, but it shows you that there's levels to this. And especially when we're talking about a divisional opponent, not to mention they've already now got guys like Zane Parekh is their Zeev Buium equivalent. Cole Reshny is their Braden Coots equivalent and is having an awesome year and is probably close to turning pro and becoming an NHL player. Matt Vakeradine, who they took with the Canucks pick as part of the Elias Lindholm trade, has already been playing NHL games this year and looks like he's going to be a good top 6 player for them moving forward. So even the Flames are, as much as nobody looks at the Flames as having a bright future and they need to find the star franchise forward, they're still significantly ahead of the Canucks when it comes to their rebuild effort. And it just goes to show you for the Canucks that, hey, this is a good start, right? I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom, but there's still so much more work that needs to be done.
And you just hope, then what we're saying is that we hope they know that, right? You hope that they have the realization that, like, hey, maybe Filip Hronek isn't going to be here when the next great Canucks team is ready to take that step. Okay, I want to talk about the Flames. I want to talk about the Blues, the Rangers as well. Let's get to anyone else, which is a presentation of our friends over at Greta. Great spot for all games, home and away. You can skip the line, not to pay cover on game nights if you're wearing the home team's gear. And of course, there's also the game day specials at Greta, including $3.33 off select food items, $3.33 for select drinks, and more with the arcade, bar, and street food menu. Greta's a great spot. Make it your spot to watch the next game. The next game's tonight. Canucks in Chicago to take on the Blackhawks. Evander Kane won't play in that game, but it's because he's sick. Ty Mueller is not recalled, is recalled. I don't know. Dhaliwal reported that Mueller was recalled, and then the Canucks told media at Rogers Arena that no, he hasn't been recalled, but he's not on the Abbotsford roster. And Dhaliwal doubled down and said he's en route. So that seems like, okay, for roster reasons, he hasn't been called up yet, but he's on his way to join the team. I don't know. We don't know. But anyway, when we look at the teams around the league, I want to start with Calgary. One thing they did today, I want to get your thoughts on this. They gave up a 7th round pick for Ryan Strome. That was a name that you brought up last night in our emergency episode.
Yeah, I would have loved to move Bluger this week for whatever he could have gotten, mid to late round pick. And then the Flames gave up a 7th round pick. The key is, with Strome as a right shot center, you're going to be able to use him as a stopgap, and you're hoping he can bounce back. He's still got some offensive juice to his game, and that at next year's trade deadline, you can retain salary on him and turn him into essentially an asset for free, whether it's a 2nd round pick, a 3rd round pick, maybe a little bit more than that if he really ends up popping off in Calgary. But the point being, that's how you manufacture value for free. And I think it brings us to a broader point with the Canucks over the last number of months, which is I still think we're waiting for the Canucks to show some level of creativity in terms of weaponizing cap space. And it's not to say that there were a ton of those opportunities out there, right? Because Patrick Laine, for example, Montreal didn't end up needing to make a move ahead of the deadline, so they didn't have to pay an asset to get off of Laine. But we saw many examples of teams taking contracts back to juice the return they got, right? So the Blues, when they got a 1st round pick, a 3rd round pick, and I believe a prospect goalie for Braden Shen, which is a strong return for a 34-year-old center who's only on pace for 38 points this season, they took back Drouin's contract. And that's something we were talking about a lot when the initial rumors between the Canucks and Islanders and maybe Connor Garland going there were happening. It was going to be imperative on whatever team made a deal with the Isles to take back Drouin's contract. And Drouin, it's not as if it's a poison pill contract. Drouin's only got a $4 million cap hit through next season. So you're going to be able to hopefully rehabilitate his value if you're St. Louis, retain, and then sell him at the deadline next year, even if it's just for a modest return. But because of that, it's, whoa, for a 34-year-old who's on pace for less than 40 points, we got a 1st, a 3rd, and a prospect goalie. That's really strong. Chicago, we've mentioned this before. They take back Mangiapane. They turn Jason Dickinson into a 1st round pick for that. Now, the Canucks did retain on Tyler Myers to juice that return, which is commendable. But organizationally, they still have to demonstrate that they're willing to take bad money on. And this is not just for this management regime, but even going back to the Jim Benning days. For the last decade, when have the Canucks been willing to take on bad money with the idea of either acquiring sweeteners or we're going to rehab this guy's value and then trade him further down the road? I remember all the way going back to 2019, I was writing about, hey, the Leafs are probably going to have to trade the last year of Patrick Marleau's contract. And at that time, it was really expensive to move off of contracts, more expensive than it is today. And I said, hey, you're probably going to get a 1st round pick from the Leafs for this. The Leafs ended up giving the Canes a 1st round pick for taking on Patrick Marleau's contract. They bought him out. That 1st round pick ended up being Seth Jarvis. And so even back then, when the incentives were even higher for taking on bad contracts, and the Canucks really should have been rebuilding, and they had the cap space to do it, they would rather spend money on the Jay Beagles of the world, the Antoine Roussels, rather than, hey, let's weaponize this cap space to bringing premium draft picks that are going to help us for the future.
Honestly, it's just a gross lack of creativity is what it is. It's a gross lack of creativity. Yeah, and it has continued. Like let's be honest, it has continued with this management regime as well. We said it yesterday. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you extend Connor Garland and then have to immediately trade him. That hurts his trade value. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know. I like imagine if they'd extended Kiefer Sherwood and then be like, whoa, we gotta trade you. Thank God that they didn't extend Kiefer Sherwood because they were able to actually get 2 seconds for him. Anyways, whatever. I don't want to revisit that. I want to focus here on what these other teams around the Canucks did. I think it's important to note. So, like we said, Calgary gives up the 7th, take on Dylan Strome. They're going to look to rehabilitate his value. Nazem Kadri, they send him to the Avalanche for a 1st, a 2nd, and Victor Olofsson. I mentioned Olofsson because I brought him up as, Canucks should go after him and see if they can rehabilitate his value. Hasn't worked out just yet. Don't think that's necessarily what the Flames are going to be doing. He's a UFA at the end of this year. And then, of course, there was the Uyghur trade from a few days ago where they obtained 3 second-round picks in the deal, not to mention Olli Mata as well. St. Louis, they get a first-round pick for Braden Shen. Took some bad money in the form of Jonathan Drouin, like you pointed out. Helped get the deal across the finish line. They get a 3rd in that deal as well. Then they flip Justin Falk to the Red Wings, get another 1st and another 3rd. They still have Kyrou. They still have Robert Thomas, and they managed to get 2 firsts and a 3rd. Like, we talk about what do the Canucks have left, and it's the one guy who's got a full no move clause that apparently you'll get gunned down as soon as you walk into Rogers Arena if you bring up the idea of trading him. It's crazy to see that these other teams still have their powder dry, kind of, even after making these deals.
Colton Parayko as well. Right now, that's obviously a little bit more complicated because you're going to have to work with them in the offseason to find a destination that's suitable. But between Parayko, Thomas, Kyrou, and even next season when Jordan Binnington is a rental and you can retain 50% on him, I imagine there's going to be a pretty decent market for him, especially if he bounces back. With his big game experience and having won a cup before, you don't think some team is going to think, oh, Jordan Binnington at $3 million, big game experience, we need help in that. We'll give you like a 2nd round pick, maybe something else. The same way that the Oilers spent a 2nd round pick plus just to bring in Tristan Jarry, who hasn't even moved the needle for them. Yeah, it shows you that a lot of these teams that are selling still have more pieces they could move off of. Even for the Flames, Blake Coleman is going to get them something significant, whether it's in the offseason or at next year's trade deadline. And honestly, Calgary is the one team that I was hoping might shoot themselves into the foot, trip over themselves with prioritizing a quick retool rather than a rebuild and perhaps hanging on to some of these veterans that they should be selling off. But they've clearly made a mandate that, hey, even though we sold off a lot a couple of years ago when they first started to sell Zadorov, Hanifin, Toffoli, on, and even though they already moved Anderson, to do Anderson, Kadri, and Uyghur, and for all those players to return you decent assets, it's showing that they're committed to a real rebuild, which I was kind of hoping that they were maybe if you're a Canucks fan, incompetent enough to again trip over themselves and not rebuild properly.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? Because I talked to Ryan Pike a lot out in Calgary. They are like not using the word rebuild. They ain't doing it. They're like, oh no, it's kind of a retool, and this is what they're doing. It's like you're acting like a rebuilding team, but you're saying you're a retool. Anyways, don't get caught up in the semantics, folks. The Flames are absolutely rebuilding. Okay. I like this. People have taken it upon themselves to start throwing out what they think the next great Canucks trade assets could be. We got Marco Rossi getting love in the chat. Someone's bringing up trading Zeev Buium because his puck skills aren't very good. Yeah, like give Zeev Buium some time, guys. It's been a really, really rough start to his Canucks tenure, but don't forget that Buium is a really, really good prospect. And when you get a first round pick, you're hoping it could turn into what Zeev Buium's been as a prospect with what he did in college and again what he did early on in his time in Minnesota, and you're hoping he can obviously take that step in Vancouver next year. Okay, Harm, anything else from the trade deadline that you wanted to get to? We've already given Canucks grades. We've already talked about what the other teams around them did. I was stunned that the Rangers didn't trade Vinny Trocheck. Do you want to go there?
Yeah, I am surprised, and we'll see, right? If in the summer we're suddenly looking at a situation where there aren't as many centers available and there are more bidders on the table that are making serious offers, then perhaps the Rangers can squeeze out more than they would have ahead of the deadline. That's always the bet, right? Is if you're not moving a guy like Trocheck that you clearly have to trade before the start of next season, well, then you better get a lot for him this summer. And so it's a market timing bet, which I'm a little bit surprised that they did, especially considering we saw Kadri and Shen and some of these other centers go as well. But ultimately, whether or not that was a good decision or not, we won't know until we see what happens with Trocheck in the summer.
Can I talk about Curtis Douglas now?
Go for it.
I texted you. I was thrilled the second I saw the notification from Elliot Friedman. What a deadline for Friedman, by the way. I think he broke like 15 trades. Canucks claim Curtis Douglas from the Tampa Bay Lightning. 6'9". Dude can drop the gloves. Allvin talked about him. Do we have the clip, Jacob? I know I'm putting you on the spot. Do we have
Yeah.
the clip of Allvin? Okay.
Yeah,
Hell
we do.
yeah. Play it. Best thing Allvin said ever.
We've been with our young guys in the lineup. I don't want to, I want their players to feel safe. I don't want them to get beaten up, and we've been looking for a player like this with more size, physicality. So when he was available here, our group felt that he, over the years, they watched him coming through the American League and in Tampa this year. We felt that would be a good fit for us and a free look here to see what we have in Curtis. And he was excited for the opportunity to come to Vancouver as well.
You're damn right, Patrick. You're damn right. You guys laugh at me. You always laugh at me. But players, look, man, you see that stick behind me? I've played the game for about a month now. Players have puffed their chest out a little bigger when you have Curtis Douglas on your bench. That's just facts. You can't teach size. Go look up the dude's fight page at hockeyfights.com. He's dropped the gloves with Nick Delorier before. And he did get a good punch on Delorier too. He lost that fight, but he still landed a pretty good punch on Delorier. Not many people do that. And not many people have the heart to drop the gloves with Delorier. So, Canucks go get their modern day enforcer, and I'm thrilled about it.
I told you yesterday I was indifferent, right? I wasn't against it. I wasn't necessarily for it. I just want to make sure that he's not taking minutes away from Aatu Räty, who I think actually has a chance of developing into something decent still. Whereas in Douglas's case, yeah, the size, the physicality, the toughness, the protect the young players, I actually see the appeal in that for sure. But from a hockey standpoint, he doesn't offer a whole lot else besides the physicality, if we're being honest. And this is where, especially after you weren't able to trade Kane and Bluger's still in the lineup, I would think it's a mistake if Douglas ends up getting a bunch of minutes over Aatu Räty. That's my only concern with it.
That's fair, but I don't look at it as Douglas over Räty. I think it's like Evander Kane's 11 games away from 1,000 games, right? He's not playing tonight. How many healthy scratches is Evander Kane going to have down the stretch of the season? Who else can you put in that bin? Like, how many? Aatu Räty should be in the lineup. David Kamp's out. Like, Aatu Räty's going to play tonight, we would assume, especially since Mueller hasn't been called up, apparently. Aatu Räty's going to play tonight. They play tomorrow night in Winnipeg, so you'd assume that Mueller gets called up for that game. I don't know. But my point being, you would hope that Aatu Räty's able to get these games, and you actually had a really good tweet about this yesterday. It's something along the lines, you correct me, you correct your thought process if I say it wrong, but it was something along the lines of, look at all the bottom six centers who are good in the dot and have size that are getting dealt for premium assets. And, premium, quote unquote, second, third round pick, whatever. Look at all of those guys. Look what playoff teams are targeting, and the Canucks can't find space for a guy who's got pretty decent size and is a face-off ace. They can't find room for him in the lineup. Am I putting words in your mouth?
Yeah,
or was
no,
that kind of what you're saying?
that's the gist of it. And honestly, on Monday, I think I want to spend a proper segment laying out the whole case, because I've got a bunch of other points on that front that I want to make. But yeah, broadly speaking, it's not just second and third round picks. A guy like Dickinson, we're talking about guys that, in the case of Chicago, yes, had to take a bad contract back as part of it, but got you a first round pick. And look, I don't think Ratu's ceiling is probably as high as Nick was, for example, but it's also instructive that Waugh and Dickinson are poor skaters. They're certainly not burners. They're sluggish. We saw Jason Dickinson in Vancouver. He's not Ratu level slow, but man, he does not move very quick. And Nick Waugh, you look at his speed burst, over 20 miles per hour data, according to NHL Edge, he's almost identical to Ratu in that category. So yeah, he's limited in terms of his foot speed. It's why there's a ceiling on how productive I think he can be offensively, particularly as a playmaker. He's just not going to be a dynamic creator. But you can't just point at the skating and say, well, because of that, he's never going to become a useful piece. And again, the point is, you don't need to be like this high-end third line guy that puts up 40 points a season to be worth a lot if you're a center that is elite in the faceoff circle and has some defensive value. So yeah, they're going to need to prioritize his development down the stretch, especially when we have this conversation about you don't have a lot of assets. I don't think you can afford to let Ratu just depreciate and become nothing, especially when I look at Max Sasson. Love the guy, friend of the show, really hard worker. But even though he's a good story and has scored 10 goals this season, he's never going to have more than marginal value to other teams. You're never going to be able to trade him for anything significant because he's small and because he doesn't win draws. So teams aren't going to view him as a viable center option. And if he's a winger option, even though he's fast, that's a dime a dozen player as a replacement level speedy winger. Whereas Ratu, I think you can actually develop him into, he has traits that other teams would actually value. And so I don't think you can afford to prioritize Sasson's playing time and his development over Ratu, especially when Ratu's younger as well.
Buddy, give me a fourth line, and someone put it here. Who said it? Someone said it. Someone said what I was thinking. Yeah, Mark Rivera in the chat said Sasson, Ratu, Douglas is a good fourth line. I love that. I love that idea as a fourth line. Dress Evander Kane is the 13th skater, or Dress Douglas is the 13th forward, right? 13th forward. Douglas plays 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whenever you need him to go drop the gloves. If you're dead set on playing Kane, I don't know. I don't know. Am I being unfair to Evander Kane by saying I really don't want to see him much down the stretch?
I don't think so. It's just there's no purpose to it. It's just taking minutes away from somebody else. And sure, after moving Kampf, there's a little bit more lineup opportunity, but even some of the guys in Abbotsford, Mueller, I want to see some of those guys get an opportunity at some point down the stretch. I'm with you. I don't think you're being overly harsh.
All right. I don't really need to read this person's comment. I've never seen a username that made me do a double take and laugh this hard. It is at politically incorrect bus driver who asked, what's the purpose of the Wu and Thompson trade? We broke this down yesterday as well, but when you look at that one, it's depth for Abbotsford. The Canucks are probably going to need bodies after trading Tyler Myers. Cole Clayton got the call up. He got sent back down today as well. I don't even know if he's going to get called back up, but regardless, if Wu wasn't going to get that call up and he's not going to get the shot after Myers, it was doing right by the player as well to give him an opportunity to go get a fresh start with a new organization. And for Thompson, he's played NHL games, so the Canucks probably value that. And again, I pointed out yesterday, his first 2 seasons in the AHL, first 2 pro seasons, they were pretty good. He just hasn't been able to build on them in the last 2 years. So there might be something there. There's probably not something there, but there might be something there. And the Canucks obviously feel pretty confident that there's nothing there with Wu. Okay. Do you have anything else other than the Tankathon?
Trying to think, there's so much that happened that my mind is still
Really? What?
So,
Name,
I
well,
mean,
not around the Canucks. I'm talking around the
Yeah.
league,
well,
obviously.
a question that I have, and Harm, you might have some thoughts on this. It feels like very few players with term got moved, and teams were out pretty early on guys like Trocheck. Like, was the lack of the double retention just like, is that going to kill the trade deadline? Because I know the last few years it seemed like the big trades or guys with term, the bigger names, all of them were the 3-team trades with the broker in the middle picking up a 5th-round pick to retain. Like, is this like a look at the future of what trade deadlines are going to be like in an era where cap's going up and you can't double retain anymore?
Yeah, it is going to be more difficult, and it's going to like not just that, but with the limitations with the new CBA around how much you can paper guys up and down, where if you're sending a guy down on an off day, he has to appear in at least one AHL game. You can't just be a team that, let's say, has a waiver exempt player. For example, what they used to do with Archie Baines in the past, when he was waiver exempt on off days, even though he was a full-time NHL player at the time, send him back to Abbotsford on an off day and accrue the tiny cap savings for that day because cap space is accrued daily. It's harder to become creative in building cap space. That way, the double retention is a limitation now. Even just broadly having the playoff salary cap, and it's harder to use LTIR for shenanigans now, where if you place a player on LTIR and it's not season ending, you're only going to get about $3.82 million in relief. And you still got to deal with the playoff salary cap. So between those different mechanisms, if you're a team that opens the season like the Oilers, a contending team, and you are right up against the cap ceiling, it's so much harder to find creative ways to manufacture in-season cap room. So that I think that makes it more important to leave at least a little bit of cap room if you're a contender, if possible. It's not always possible at the start of the season, and let that build over the remainder of the campaign, because quite clearly it limited a team like Edmonton where,
yeah,
like I like the Murphy ad and Dickinson will be fine for them, but considering what they gave up and having to move off of contracts, if they had more cap flexibility, they probably would have been able to take swings on a different tier of player, and they wouldn't have been like, they had to send Mangiapane down to the minors, waive him and bury him down there just to bring in Murphy originally and then send him out to Chicago. It is more difficult.
100%. And I wonder if that's something that we see changed in future years. We'll see. Jacob, can you bring up my predictions, please? Jacob, write it down, Doc.
Yep, I've got it.
Updates. So we determined yesterday or 2 days ago when we last looked at this that I'm batting like 950. I rarely am wrong about anything, it seems like. So what am I right about? What am I wrong about with this deadline?
All right. So, well, still possibility Canucks will be Evander Kane's last NHL team. A few people in the chat saying he's going to end up in Europe next year. Like, I think the chat quads thinks you're going to hit on that one. But what we know for sure, that Teddy Bluger will be a Canuck after the deadline. Nailed that. Right. He is still a Vancouver Canuck. One of Kampf or Bluger is still here after the deadline. Well, you hit that because it's Bluger. Kampf obviously shipped out.
That's kind of a cop-out. You can delete that one. Don't put it toward my record.
Only one pending unrestricted free agent traded. Now, do you want to count like Lucas Reichel? He was an AHLer though at the time.
RFA. He's an RFA.
That's true. Sorry, that's true. He's an RFA. You specified UFA. So the only UFA being traded is Kampf.
That's a hit.
That's a hit. And that's it. The other stuff is we still need time. Now, I think interestingly, the Rangers retool will be a full rebuild. I think if that was the case, they would have just taken what they could have gotten for Trocheck right now, but that can still change in the summer, obviously. So there you go.
Chris Drury, do I still have the one of Chris
Drury fired before the draft?
It amazes me that dude's still employed. Amazes me.
Yeah.
Rajcraft said, what about when you said Kane was going to be good? Do you guys remember how strongly I felt that Kane was going to be great?
I remember.
Canucks? That's on there. We have, look, just because I'm right about most things, we do have the stuff that I was wrong about too. Those are still on there. I tell Jacob to write it down. It's not like he's doing me favors deleting
Although
it if I'm
I
wrong.
will say you got lucky because that was one of the things on my list when my computer hard drive exploded earlier in the season.
That's right.
That was part of the list that was lost to time, but the chat remembers. The streets won't forget that one, Quads.
That's okay.
Honestly, that hard drive corrupting must have helped, because I don't know if did you make a Demko related thing? I just remember you were very on board with the extension and thought that he was definitely going to bounce back.
Whoa. No, I wasn't. No.
Okay,
I was saying that's too expensive, and it just felt like you didn't need to do it because, again, I was all over this talking about how if you don't extend him and he plays great, then yeah, you're probably looking at a double-digit cap hit, which you're not thrilled about. But if you can get him for like 5-6 million annually, then you might have a bargain.
Okay,
and I
fair.
just said this makes no sense. That was what I was saying at the time, I think.
Yeah, well, I just remember
that.
season end when we had the Demko discussion, because I asked him at that end of season availability, are you looking to explore an extension now? And that was a talking point. And my immediate thought, which changed a little bit once I realized that if Demko doesn't work out, they're cooked anyway. So I was like, to some degree, the risk isn't as high as maybe you think, because they're going to be screwed anyway if Demko doesn't pan out. But my initial reaction was non-starter for the idea of extending Demko. And I think, yeah, you were, in fairness, you were open to it if it was like a $5-6 million AAV, and it clearly wasn't that. So I'll cut you slack there. But you were definitely, I think, feeling good about a bounce back, and unfortunately we didn't get that.
This is phenomenal. Dylan McDonald just brought up something awesome in the chat. He said, I swear I watched you three do a fantasy draft. I think Quads took Petey and had Demko as his goalie. Was I dreaming? Because I haven't heard a thing about it since.
You did.
We did do one.
We did.
Do you still have it, Jacob?
No, but that one's easy to find because we did it like at the end of a show right before the season started.
Yeah,
so that'll be an easy one to recover.
Find it. I can't wait to see how bad my team is.
If I remember the rules, it was like really basic. I think we're picking small teams, and you had to have at least one Canuck or two Canucks.
One Canuck,
and yeah, I think
4.
Yeah, and Quad, you definitely took Pedersen. You definitely took Demko.
Good stuff.
Yeah, but well.
Okay.
That one we will circle back. That's an easy one to find, even though I lost my my document.
Okay. Condones in the chat said St. Louis has 3 first-round picks this year, by the way, and J-Mobs jumped in behind him and said, yeah, St. Louis can legit keep Thomas and Kyrou and actually do a modern-day retool. They're set up enough for it.
The Blues are a weird one, because ahead of the season, I expected them to be competitive for the playoffs. Remember how highly we were talking about the Blues down the stretch last year?
Yeah.
And I'm curious how much of their dramatic fall off this year is just how bad the goaltending has been. So next year will be really telling as far as how quickly can the Blues turn things around, because I actually like a lot of their pieces. When you look at Thomas, Kyrou, Holloway, who they'll need to bounce back, Broberg, they've got some legit talent on that team, and they've got some prospects coming. But we'll see. They're a weird one. I didn't expect them to be this bad this year.
Well, I've got something here on St. Louis. Of all the teams outside the playoffs right now, they have the second most regulation wins. They might be third last overall, but that's just because they have not won in overtime yet this season. And so like their record of 23, 29, and 9, they have 1 shootout win, 22 regulation wins. The only teams outside the playoffs right now with more, or I guess, sorry, there's 2 teams tied with 24, being Florida and Ottawa. And then Washington has the most at 26. But like Washington and Ottawa are both not far out of a wild card spot. So St. Louis with 22 regulation wins, like as bad as they are, as it looks in the standings, I don't think they are clearly as bad of a team as, say, a Vancouver or a Calgary or even a New York. Like that, the comments about them using these 3 picks, having some young talent, and maybe actually retooling, that's certainly possible, I think, with what St. Louis has.
Jacob, let's do Tankathon.
Yeah,
we did it yesterday.
You.
Did you get the results from Jake back up?
Yeah, yes. Jake Fraser sent me the results. What was it? I think it was
Canucks were third again. I
Yeah,
don't
Canucks
remember
were
who won.
third. I think Chicago won it, was what I was told.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
sounds right.
All right. Well, it's time for the Tankathon.
Everyone's favorite segment on Canucks Conversation. There's
Oh,
Patrick Allvin
not
reacting to the
Patrick
Canucks
Allvin. There
dropping
we
to
go.
third again.
All right. Yeah, let's see what happens. I'm looking through my my sounds here. It looks like we have a drum roll sound. So let's see. Let's spruce this up a little bit. See if we can change the juju. Nope. St. Louis Blues now pick first overall, and New Jersey jumps to second. Oh, there we go. Now it's an easy retool for the Blues. They're making the playoffs next year behind Gavin McKenna, keeping Kyrou and Thomas and Binnington. So there you go.
This is horrible. This is horrible.
You know, the last thing I'll say is probability is a fickle thing. We're going to end this, and probably the Canucks are supposed to have a 25% chance of picking first. Our data is going to have them picking first like 6% of the time. So that means when the actual lottery comes up, the odds will be in your favor. You know, it's like when you're losing every hand of blackjack, and then the next time you go, you're expecting to actually win your money back. Always works out, right? Every time.
Yeah,
I'm,
just because I got tails 3 times in a row, I'm gonna get heads next time.
Yep, exactly. That's how it works.
I'm gonna do an experiment with Bert. I'm gonna do this sooner. I need to get it done soon. I'm gonna just lay out. There's no science behind it. I'm gonna put out treats on a bunch of different cards, and I'll be able to do this. I'll decrease. How would I do this? What's the math on it? Because obviously I need to do fractions here. I need to get a certain amount of Canucks cards out. Calgary Flames, throw them all in a line, like a straight line, and put treats on them, and then he can just come pick one. Science.
I'm in.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do our Bet365 bet of the day. What did I take yesterday? I can't remember. I took a home underdog for sure. Did the Ducks play? Ducks sound like something I might have picked.
I know you picked the Ducks earlier in the week, but I wasn't with you guys yesterday, so I don't know.
Oh, I mean, we don't have to talk about it, but Darlene and Malkin, Harm, you texted me about it. Malkin just 2-hand swing on Darlene. He's having a hearing today, so let's not spend too much time on it. We'll have a reaction to it on Monday. Has to be a suspension, I would think. He swung his stick at Darlene's head. You can't do that. All right, let's get to our Bet365 bet of the day. Looking for a home underdog. Oh, and we found one. Tonight, actually, I don't want to bet on the Oilers. What am I doing? I'm not taking the Oilers. I'm taking the Anaheim Ducks, who are taking on the Montreal Canadiens. The Ducks are riding high. They just traded for John Carlson. They're feeling great about themselves. And they live so close to Disneyland. Anaheim Ducks, -110. You can get the Ducks money line over at Bet365. Whatever your bet is, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Download the app and get on the game. Use the code NATION at Bet365. Must be 19 plus play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly. All right. Great trade deadline, folks. That was a lot of fun. We'll wrap it up there for my co-host Harmon Dial and our technical producer Jacob Lazar. We'll see you Monday, folks. Happy trade deadline day. Thanks so much for listening to another episode of Canucks Conversation. Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.